happening, everybody? Hope everybody's having a fantastic start to their week. You know, at least it ain't Monday, right? But it's Tuesday, and right now the presidential debates are going on, and I figured with all the hot air getting blown around on that side, I figured I would, chat with you guys about Boost. It kind of inspired me, so to speak. So I get a lot of questions about Boost. What type of supercharging should I put together for this particular platform? What kind of should I even run Nitrous, which I didn't even put into the thing. So Luigi's checking in saying hi. What's up, man? So I wanted to talk about the different supercharging methods, what they are like to drive. I mean, you can see the power numbers and everything else. I mean, you're not immune to seeing those dyno graphs. But what you may not be aware of is just the actual driving experience. What's it like to actually drive the contraption? Because what ends up happening is that sometimes you'll go out and spend the money, but the result really isn't all that it was cracked up to be. In other words, the driving experience isn't marketably improved. So what I wanted to do is, I guess, kind of get you guys moving in the right direction based on what your needs might be. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. First and foremost, we're going to talk about positive displacement superchargers. Talk about a lot of hot air, the original supercharging system. Positive displacement just basically means that for every turn of those rotors, you're dumping a specific metered amount of air. So basically, there is no guessing when it comes to a positive displacement supercharger. The driving experience on that is just like driving a car, with a much larger engine. It has the net effect of basically increasing the power band everywhere. And that might sound like a pretty good idea. I mean, you can basically take a 5-liter engine and make it act like a 7-liter engine all the time. So you have immediate tip-in throttle response, or at least immediate tip-in torque. But again, there's obviously going to be some kind of a trade-off, or at least there's no free lunches. So the first drawback to positive displacement, it's heavy. Now, I'm going to talk about, first, before I get too deep into this, I'm going to talk about some of the things that aren't necessarily awesome with the particular mode of Boost. But mainly because I want you to know that there is really a bunch of trade-offs, one versus the next. So starting off with positive displacement, one first negative, it's heavy. There's a lot of mass sitting right there. In fact, you're looking at somewhere around 125 pounds of just supercharging right there sitting on top of the engine. That along with all the different cooling apparatuses. They generate a lot of heat too, which can be a bit of a problem, especially when you start to consider that, heat, not only does it kill power, but heat immediately, especially when you have immediate boost response, means that you can have low speed spark knock. And that's an area where a lot of folks, that's where a lot of engines fail. Let's just put it to you that way. So getting back around to it, the weight. And I want to talk about the weight a little bit because this is something that is kind of an interesting concept for a lot of guys. The weight of the thing is enough to actually throw off the balance of the car. For a lot of folks, they'll take a look at that particular type of supercharging and think, man, it looks great. It's like having all this, extra horsepower and torque pretty much everywhere. But not only does it kind of screw up the balance in terms of weight transfer, as well as, just the fact that you're throwing an extra 100 pounds on the front of the car can make turn in a little bit slower. It does a lot of things that kind of upset the actual driving experience. But the big part, when I say unbalanced, is that because you have this big torque hit down low, traction, launching the car, street tires become meaningless on the street, much less on a drag strip. Basically, it makes lighting the tires up more or less a brainless operation. You just roll into the throttle and the tires go up in smoke. It's a lot of fun, but it's fun like a really rich fudge is fun. I mean, in small doses, it's fantastic, but easy to OD on in other ways. But OE manufacturers love positive displacement supercharging, especially they love it in some cases over turbocharging. In other words, why does the Hellcat have a supercharger if not a turbocharger? And spoiler alert, turbocharging is hands down the most efficient means of introducing boost into the engine. But we'll circle back around on that here in a minute. The reason why manufacturers like positive displacement superchargers is for another reason where the positive displacement supercharger does have an advantage over the rest of the group. And that is in that it is a very clean, very easy to install package. In other words, packaging. It is incredibly simple in terms of front engine accessory drive, engine accessibility, everything else. Basically, it is nothing more than an intake manifold with some rotating parts spinning around in there. That's it. And because of that, it's a lot easier to package into the engine compartment of any said automobile. And not to mention the fact that with that with that positive displacement supercharger and the bigger hit of torque down low, the cars are inherently a little bit more fun to drive. In fact, you'll probably find that just tooling around with a car with a positive displacement supercharger is a lot more fun in general than driving around a car with a centrifugal supercharger, or even in some cases a turbo. So that's basically a positive displacement supercharger in a nutshell. Probably the least efficient out of all of them, the most easily packaged, has the heaviest hit of torque down low, can make the car a bit of a handful. But here's a couple of other things that I want to talk about for you guys that are thinking about throwing a positive displacement supercharger on your, say, 5.7 or 392. First and foremost, you've got to remember, again, instant boost response means instant torque, and you're moving a lot of mass. That's not a problem, except the transmission has to transmit that power to the ground. So they're going to be a little bit harder on the transmission. Now, if you're running stock tires, that's really a non-issue, primarily because the tires are just going to go up in smoke and you won't have anything really to worry about in terms of load, which again circles back around to the fun part about it. The only other downside to the positive displacement supercharger, and this is debatable here, a positive displacement supercharger will typically, and this is for OE applications, not necessarily for an aftermarket application if you're putting this on a 392 or a 5-liter LS. But typically, the way that just again, getting back to that driving experience, yes, you have a lot of torque, but positive displacement cars tend to be a little bit lumbering, if you want to use a word to describe it. It's kind of hard to put it into words, but yes, the engine acts as though it's just a bigger engine, but it acts as though it's a bigger engine in a lesser state of tune. So yeah, 700 horsepower is 700 horsepower, but you will know the difference between a 700 horsepower naturally aspirated big block, which is going to be snappy, real nasty, want to rev all the time. It's going to be much more lively on the big end, whereas the positive displacement supercharger will be more tuggy. It's just going to be torque all the time, and you'll have this feeling like horsepower is just kind of along for the ride. It's not like the naturally aspirated cars or maybe a centrifugally supercharged car where it just, the harder you push it, the stronger it gets. You're not going to get that sense out of a positive displacement supercharger in the same way that you'll get the sense out of the other boost methods. So again, that's always been my impression. I guess I'm going to say this: if you're considering boosting your car, the easiest way to go is going to be positive displacement, primarily because it's the cleanest looking, it's the easiest to install, and it's the easiest to dismantle should you need to put the thing back to stock. Plus, a lot of folks prefer driving positive displacement supercharged cars. And the reason for that, again, it just makes the thing feel like it's just got a much bigger engine than it really does. And in a way, it kind of does because it's processing the air. You understand what I'm saying? So next, I want to talk about, well, we've got to talk about the elephant in the room, the ProCharger systems. So when it comes to the LX package, and really this applies to the Mustangs and anything LS based, basically everything, but it's hard to argue against just the freaking efficiency differences between a positive displacement supercharger and a centrifugal supercharger. A centrifugal supercharger, what's it like to drive? A centrifugal supercharger is not going to be quite as exciting as a positive displacement supercharger to drive around regularly. And what I mean by that is if you're driving a centrifugally supercharged car, you will need the downshift. You will need RPM to make power. You don't have to do that with a positive displacement supercharger. You tip into the throttle, boost goes up, you are moving. The downshift just drags more torque with it. Centrifugal, on the other hand, has a rising boost curve. And what that means is that the harder you push it, the more power it's going to want to make, the more boost that it's going to make. The upside to that, well, it's got several upsides. One, it makes the car a bit more livable if you're trying to launch it from lower speeds. It makes the car a bit less prone to be tail happy in low speed, high load conditions, especially if you're still running street tires. Basically, it's a little bit friendlier in that respect, if you want to call that friendly. I mean, we've got to be kind of nice, right? We've got to say that a lack of torque is good some way. Anyway, but the best part about a centrifugal supercharger is that it's a linear power curve, it's a rising boost curve, it pushes your torque and your horsepower significantly farther to the right on the dyno sheet. But the main thing is that it is easier, and this is for street application. I'm not talking about all-out race, F1, E85 setup. I'm talking about the normal street setup stuff. You're looking to have a car that is going to be real strong on the upper end, which for a lot of guys, that's what they're looking for. They're really not concerned about bumping that power down low. They just want more power up top where they want it. In other words, trips to Mexico, you're doing a lot of highway pulls, things like that. That's really where that centrifugal supercharger is going to come into play. For most guys, that is going to be a go-to solution, if you will, to their horsepower needs. Mainly because it seems to be easier on every part downstream. And because of that, especially for the guys that aren't going to the drag strip, that's why they'll gravitate more towards that type of a supercharger. Now, you might say, well, what about giving up all the torque down low? Well, yeah, you're going to give up a lot of torque down low, but is it worth it for that extra efficiency? Plus, let's say if you've got two engines, both of them, one of them with a positive displacement supercharger is making 500 horsepower. Centrifugal supercharger is going to make about 530, 550. It'll just simply make more power, again, further down to the right on the dyno chart. And again, it's going to push that torque number over significantly also. You might make peak torque at, say, 4,000 RPM with a positive displacement. That number could go to 4,700, 4,800 RPM or even higher with a centrifugal supercharger. That helps, again, with every shift point after, if you're just running the thing on the highway. Again, you're not worried about launching necessarily. And speaking of which, they are going to be easier to launch. You can be a lot more lead-footed, ham-fisted, if you will, with a centrifugal supercharged car than you can be with a positive displacement car. Another thing that's good about the centrifugals is that they are, again, significantly more efficient in that they also don't generate near the heat. So what they may lack in power production down low, typically they won't be as prone to low speed spark knock as the positive displacement superchargers can be. So that would mean that, you know, when you're overcoming that inertia, even if you're just going through and, you know, rolling in and tipping, no, you don't have the power, but typically they can be a little bit safer if you want to look at it from that point of view. So what are some other advantages? Well, it depends on what you're doing with these cars. And I need to circle back around on the positive displacement supercharger to discuss a couple of things real quick. First and foremost, what type of driving are you doing with the car? It's really going to dictate the supercharger that you get. If you're doing a lot of street driving, a drag race type stuff, you're probably going to gravitate a little bit more towards the positive displacement supercharger over the centrifugal. We're looking at launch characteristics, we're transmission allowing, by the way, but you're looking at launch characteristics, you're looking at average power band across the board. And if you're looking really to make somewhere around, you know, that, I don't know, that 550, maybe as high as 600 to the rear wheels, there's no reason to sacrifice the torque down low to get there. However, if you're going to be doing a lot of highway pulls, if you like the rush of the power up top versus the tip-in torque down low, or let's say you like to do closed circuit racing, you like to take the car to, you know, your local 1.5 or 2.5 mile circuit, you're probably going to want a centrifugal supercharger over that positive displacement supercharger, primarily because it's lighter. Typically the kits are significantly lighter, to the tune of probably half the weight, and they don't generate near the heat. So that would be my suggestion there. I mean, again, you know, it's going to make it easier for the car to come out of corners. You can flat foot it. You can flat foot early into the apex. You're going to make your peak power where you want it on the straights at the top of the straight, or at least going through the gears at the top of the gears, as opposed to wasting this torque potential in an area that you're never going to see. That car's just never going to see that that low of an RPM. So, a couple of advantages there for the centrifugal supercharger. And again, in terms of packaging, it's going to be second in line here. And don't worry, Nitrous guys, I'm going to get to y'all in just a second. That's going to come up last. But talking about boost first, the packaging of a centrifugal supercharger is going to be a bit suspect. Mainly because you're trying to pick up on real estate underneath the hood that is, well, quite honestly, was never designed to have anything go there to begin with. So you still need your intake manifold. Positive displacement takes the place of your intake manifold. So it's removing a part and putting a part in. In the case of a centrifugal supercharger, you've got all of your stuff there, plus you've got to cram more crap into that same 5-pound sack. So they can be a little bit busy looking under the hood. You'll end up getting the filters in places where you don't necessarily want them, or they really shouldn't be, basically because packaging dictates no other alternative. So keep that in the back of your mind when you're looking at your kits. Make sure that your intended purpose is first and foremost, though. Don't get wrapped up in the dyno numbers, because the dyno numbers are just going to be secondary. All that's going to do is tell you basically the way the thing comes on in power, but you need to know how it's going to drive underfoot. Oh, one thing about centrifugal superchargers, and I hate to say this, guys, I know you guys with the Pro Chargers and Torque Storms and all that, or you're thinking about getting one. Look, here's the deal. They are less exciting to drive for the most part, power for power, mainly because of that rising boost curve. You don't really ever get a sense that you're really getting thrown into the seat unless you've got the boost seriously turned up. To give you an example of that, positive displacement supercharger at about 8 pounds of boost, 9 pounds of boost is going to feel like a car with about half again more displacement. To get that same pull up top, because 8 pounds ain't going to cut it with a centrifugal supercharger, you're going to need somewhere around 12 pounds. And that's just my own personal experience. You know, your results may vary, etc. But I'm going to tell you right now that every time that I've driven, data logged, what have you, the centrifugal supercharged cars, the low boost ones, I mean, you might as well not even put a supercharger on it, or at least you picked the wrong supercharger for the application. Body count 1 so far. Skeeter, 1 Skeeter dead. And again, it's not to try to play one side against the other. It's just this is what it feels like to drive the different cars. I would prefer on a centrifugal to see at least that number, because that would insinuate you've got a higher impeller speed and that your low speed throttle response is going to be improved at least by a little bit. Because keep in mind, it's not like the centrifugal supercharger isn't making any boost at the hit. They do. In fact, typical number is about 3 pounds of boost, but that 3 pounds of boost could be going up against, if we're going to again keep comparing one against the other, positive displacement versus centrifugal, that 3 pounds of boost could be going up against 10. And there's a massive difference at that point. But again, low speed spark knock, load, inertial overcoming of all of that comes into play. So let me check in with everybody real quick. Mark Corleone checking in saying, good evening, Professor. Got the arm flex. I like it. Super Luigi's checking in saying you're so cool. Thank you very much. Dr. Div saying turbo all the way, come up. I'll be chatting about turbos here in just a second. Some for our guys saying a topic I'm pondering: force induction on my Gen 2 Coyote MT82 car. Paxson Procharger is my choice at the moment. Yes, that would be my choice on that engine. I like centrifugally supercharged Coyotes a lot. I like them on the street, I like them on the track, but I really like them with manual transmissions. Here's what I would suggest for you, my brother. I wouldn't even consider a positive displacement supercharger with your manual transmission. You will have a ton of torque that you really won't ever be able to use. And the centrifugal supercharger, when it comes on in a Coyote, is so much freaking fun. And I mean, again, you just have the platform, play to that platform strengths. That's at least been my experience with those. And by the way, it is the honorable mention car that I was bummed to see leave was a 2016, 2017 Coyote with a Procharger 6-speed manual. I loved driving that car. And keep in mind, guys, when I'm driving these cars, I'm data logging them. Okay, I may as well be wearing a white lab coat. There's nothing more boring or nerve-wracking than collecting data on something that you have to go high load, high mile per hour, basically. But anyway, high load, high RPM, and data log that. It's nerve-wracking, but the Coyotes with the Powerdynes, I'm sorry, Powerdynes, the Coyotes with the Prochargers were always a lot of fun to drive. Let's see, Dr. Diff, chatting about turbos. Dr. Diff saying no debate tonight. Now, I covered that in about the first 10 seconds of the video. Too much hot air, so now we're talking about hot air on the debate. Now we're talking about hot air and debating different supercharging options. Dr. Diff saying positive displacement, punch down low, also more torque. A lot of guys like it. Some for our guys saying I'm leaning towards the Paxson. Sure is playing to the Coyote's strengths of making power up top. Combo with free-flowing exhaust and a ported 18 intake manifold, and just make all the jams 6,000 plus. Man, I'm telling you, they do make a ton. Let's see. Dr. Div saying centrifugal superchargers usually having a rising boost curve versus positive displacement, not liking upper RPM horsepower. So centrifugal will certainly show more power typically. I prefer turbo. We'll get to turbos in a minute, and it has a flat torque curve. Go 74 said, hey B Mason, this is a chat for me. I like it. Dr. Diz saying, hell yeah, this is a chat for anyone in the car world. Anyone who wants knowledge from a knowledgeable guy who knows what power actually is. Thank you much, brother. Go74 is saying that he's got a 65 Biscayne. Love the car. He currently has a 283 in her with a glide, but I have a 383 stroker that I plan on turbocharging. Will the glide handle it? The glide probably will, but just remember, just because it's a glide doesn't mean that it will be able to be bomb-proof. I'd probably say have somebody go through it. You're going to want to have a good converter. You know, probably, depending on your gearing, somewhere, well, 383 is probably going to like something at about the 2,400 RPM range. But again, just make sure somebody goes through it. Give Dr. Diff a shout. He can definitely walk you through the do's and don'ts of a glide. But stereotypically, yeah, it'll handle basically whatever you want to throw at it. Plus, they're light. Dr. Diff saying a power glide will hold anything you can ever push at it. It may need to be beefed up. Yep, see, he's already beat me to it. Oh, some Ferrari guy saying, did you see George Low Speed run a 9.8 in his NA Nitrous LT1 SS? Boy, was putting in work. It may have gone a little bit quicker than that, bro. I like that guy a lot. George Low Speed, if you guys don't know him, check him out. Super cool guy, man. I mean, in person, you know, I see him at the drag strip every weekend. Awesome guy, fun car, awesome to chat about, and yeah, he's getting that number down. So yeah, be on the lookout for him. Go74 saying horsepower is addicting. I can always want more. I can't stop. Shawnee's saying roots, love the torque. Dr. Div saying nitrous is like a drug. It's fun. But yeah, no. The problem with we'll get to nitrous in a minute, but nitrous has its own drawbacks, and I'll get to some of those. But there's a lot of upshot to nitrous. And Dr. Div saying it's fun when it's right. Andy G saying boost is enough for me. Star Class saying thoughts on Kenny Bell would be insightful. A discussion on the cooling differences would also be great. What works better, worse, etc. So we've been speaking. That's a good point. So Star Classics, let's switch gears. I'd love to talk about that. So the different types of cooling. Normally, positive displacement will have an air-to-water intercooler. In fact, it'll either have an air-to-water intercooler or it won't have anything at all. So why is that? Well, one is packaging. The way that the supercharger is set up on a Hellcat, you've got, and on Lightnings and practically anything with a positive displacement supercharger, is you have small, what we call bricks. They're small radiators. Basically, you've got coolant running through them. The boost runs down through those radiators and it extracts heat. Those radiators, the bricks that we call them, are full of antifreeze. Basically, it's not the cooling system. It's a separate cooling system with its own separate pump and a heat exchanger. So the circuit looks like this. Pump will run the fluid through a heat exchanger. It's an air-to-air heat exchanger. It'll run the fluid through the heat exchanger, basically think of it like a radiator. That cooled coolant will go back up into the system, right over here, right in the back, and that'll fill the bricks. From the bricks, after it absorbs the heat, that now hotter fluid will go through the system, back through the pump, and then through the heat exchanger. And it's very effective. Air-to-water intercooling is significantly more effective than air-to-air intercooling. However, it does have some drawbacks. Namely, you got to have a pump and you got to have fluid. It adds weight and complexity to the system. Hey, buddy. Now then, all right, Torque's making his nightly appearance over here. Hey, buddy. You doing good? I'll say hi to everybody. My baby boy, I love you so much. Now, that being said, you've got air-to-air intercooling. Air-to-air intercooling is still very effective, and in fact, it's the type of intercooling that centrifugal superchargers will typically employ, as well as a lot of turbo systems. Number one, it's a lot less effective than an air-to-water, but it's a lot more simple, and it will definitely get the job done as far as dumping heat. It's a lot easier to, in a lot of ways, package an air-to-air. Thank you, baby. Primarily because you don't have to worry about pumps and reservoirs and any of that other stuff. Now, all that being said, You've got to remember though that anytime you're running any type of boost, it's always, and I mean always, preferable to have some type of cooling, charge cooling in effect. So when is it not, I mean, why is it that you see different types of boost, basically different superchargers with different cooling measures? Well, some of it may have to do with cost, and it's, again, you don't necessarily need, he's licking bugs off the freaking front of the Hellcat, my boy. So part of it is cost, and not to mention, if you're running really low boost, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good to complicate an entire system just because, oh buddy, just because you know, you don't want to have the added cost to it. Plus, you're not going to be dumping a whole lot of heat out of a low boost system. So think in terms of something like 6 to 7 pounds of boost. Well, a lot of times it's not going to do you a whole lot of good because your discharge temperature is just not going to be that high, and it won't be worth it to pump it through an intercooling system, which, by the way, will absorb some of that boost pressure. So you may have 6 pounds of boost coming out of your compressor, but only be filling the cylinders with 5 pounds of boost once it goes through restrictions and things like that through an intercooling system. Again, you can kind of see where intercooling just really wouldn't make sense in that effect. And also, some guys prefer it basically because, at least in terms of a centrifugal supercharger, it's a little bit quicker to respond. The throttle response can be a little bit better with that same setup at the lower boost. It works both ways. But again, low boost, you don't really need it. In fact, I've even run a T-trim with no aftercooling. Not necessarily one of my smarter engineering endeavors, but my power dyne and the S-trim never did have any type of charge cooling, and I ran 10 pounds of boost through them and never really ran into an issue. So it's a far cry from the obnoxious pulley ratio that my T-trim was running. But anyway, that's kind of the long and short of the two different cooling methods. Now, you could consider meth injection as a cooling method, but that's mainly for charge cooling, which is kind of what we're talking about anyway, but it's done through different means. Here's what I will warn you about using meth. First of all, and I'm not going to give you the whole history lesson of where it comes from, but I will tell you this: it was really initially designed back in the 1920s and 30s as a direct port charge. Actually, I'm sorry, it was a direct port AKF, anti-knock fluid is what they called it, and it was for World War II aircraft. I'm diving into this a little bit deeper than I wanted to, but anyway, the original design was for direct port, so that could be the cylinder fill could be metered. That's an important part in this because it's the distribution of that anti-knock fluid, which is going to be your meth injection, your water meth injection, that can get you into trouble. So let's say you're hitting this thing with meth injection and you've got a positive displacement supercharger. Because I'm just thinking about this because this is something that you run into problems with this with the Hellcats, or can run into problems with this with the Hellcats. That system is not designed to flow any kind of liquid. It's designed to flow air. So when you introduce a fluid, the distribution of the fluid once it hits, like imagine you're the intake manifold that's you're getting this charge, this air charge. Now it has a liquid. You may have 7 and 8 get a big gulp of this stuff. 1 and 2 don't really hardly see any, and you have a smattering of distribution in the middle. At low meth injection figures, in other words, at low volume, that's not necessarily a problem. In fact, some folks will have some anti-knock and it'll work seemingly fine. But again, your distribution is not even across each cylinder. So because of that, again, if you want to start running more boost, some guys end up running more meth, you end up filling practically, damn near hydrolocking, one cylinder or two cylinders in the process of this. And what makes that even worse is that some guys will actually try to tune using that particular fluid, whether it's straight meth, 50-50, 70-30 water meth. You can't, my only advice when you're looking at that is don't try to tune for that. I had one particular instance where, and it was a LS swamped Jeep, four-door Jeep. It had a 2650 Maggie on it. And anyway, in the course of data logging this thing, I just about fell out of my skin because the injector duty cycle pinned. And this thing wasn't even at 4,500 RPM, and I was literally thinking the thing was going to blow up, not realizing that sitting behind the back seat was a Snow Performance. Well, I had a Snow Performance kit on it, but this guy had about 7 gallons of boost juice of the water meth fluid back there, but he had a tank back there. It was like this fairly decent size, like it looked like a carry-on full of, anyway. And that's what was holding that car together. I mean, it was partially running on meth injection, which is the exact way you don't want to go with one of those things. So anyway, getting back to it, as far as the cooling methods, different ways, charge cooling, stuff like that, there are different methods. For me, you're never going to really get away from what's customary with these kits. Again, centrifugal, you're going to see air to air, and positive displacement, most of the time, if it has any cooling at all, it's going to be, that's for older stuff. You guys mess with the older stuff, you know what I'm talking about. But for the newer stuff, it's all going to be air to water. And again, a lot of that has to do with the amount of heat that these superchargers generate, which gets me back around to part of your initial question. What about the Kenny Bell? Something flew up my nose again. Kenny Bell is a lot of fun. Kenny Bells are loud. They sound amazing, and they add a lot of theater to your driving experience. The only downside to a Kenny Bell is that they generate an obnoxious amount of heat given the amount of boost that they're making. Kenny Bell was really good in terms of being an upgrade back when a lot of the Eaton Roots blowers were running around out there. And of course, Kenny Bell just simply made a bigger blower also. So slightly more efficient, but significantly larger. And that was the way you would go. I mean, you had a lot of Lightning guys, Termi Cobra guys, GT500 guys. That's the direction that they would go. But the modern technology that we have today has kind of surpassed that. Whipple, IHI, Magnuson, these are all, what the hell flew up my face? These are all manufacturers that have incorporated newer technology into their superchargers and have just simply outpaced that auto rotor compressor that's on the Kenny Bell. Again, it's not a knock on the Kenny Bell though, because there's value to the theater of having a Kenny Bell. But believe me when I tell you, there is a reason why that case is fluid cooled. At least the newer ones, the bigger ones, the 4.5, 4.8, 4 whatevers. They need to be, because again, they just generate so much freaking heat. Go74 is saying, hopefully that answers some questions up for you, Star. Go74 is saying, I'm going to see how much my iron block can handle. Good place to start. Star saying, going to try to watch this from the beginning. Caught this late. Nah, no problem, man. Hop on in. Scott saying, advice between supercharged Corvette 1999 C5 or 2016 RT Challenger. Realize C5C would be faster, but yet it's 20 years older, plus doing the Challenger would be more in comparison. So yes, all of those points are 100% accurate. I will tell you that C5s are just awesome. I had a C5 Z06. There are times where I wish I had that car back, primarily because I feel like I just had too much cam in the thing, and it made it a little bit too top end happy, but that's really beside the point. C5s are a lot of fun. You can do a lot with them. They're fairly inexpensive, all things considered, and I I mean, all you got to do is throw a blower on the thing and have a ball. So I say, you know, jump square in the middle of it. If you've got that option, depending on what you want to do with that car, that's probably going to be the smart option for you. Plus, they're easy to sell once you want to get rid of it. Scott saying, very informative, B. Mason. Great topic. Thank you very much. Let's see. Cody's asking, with a 4.7 with 228,000 miles, should be okay to take boost. Just got to rebuild it after one pass. Well, one thing's pretty certain anyway. You should have plenty of ring gap already involved in that. So, only one way to find out, buddy. Let's see. Chris is asking, what's up, B. Mason? I'm new to the channel via Racer X. I got a 16 SRT 392 6-speed manual. What would you recommend for boosting? In that case, my man, I tell you what, go with the Procharger, and I'll tell you why. We had at the shop a 2014 SRT8 6-speed car. That car with a small kit, just a D1 with a street intercooler, on a Mustang dyno, stock it made 390 to the rear wheels. With the Supercharger, it made 535. Real pretty car, white with red stripes, super cool guy that owned it. Altogether, just a fun car to drive. That is probably the direction that I would take. A very close second to that, though, and I mean a very close second, would be a E-Force, Edelbrock E-Force with that Maggie. Just don't get greedy with the boost either way you go. And again, it depends on what you're up to with the car. If you're just going out playing, doing highway pulls, you know, that Procharger is going to be tough to beat. But in terms of overall driving feel, especially with the way that your car is geared with the more aggressive first gear than the Hellcats, I think you'll find that the Maggie will just be more fun overall. You won't make the outright horsepower that you will with the Procharger, but you may not ever even need that, or may not even care about that. I mean, you're just more into rolling into the throttle and hearing the thing. That's the way to go. And like I said before, positive displacement is a lot cleaner install. Let's see. Modern Red Hemi saying he's got a 5.7, looks like the same maybe truck with a comp 270, ported heads, long tube 392 intake, and putting a Procharger. Thoughts? Well, it'll run good. I would say make sure that you get the race intercooler, and I would probably say go D1X, considered everything that you've done to that thing so far, but I think you'll like it. It'll run great, I'll tell you that. Go 74 saying, I want to make the Biscayne my first drag car, and I think a turbocharged 383 with a glide will make a good combo. It will be a good combo. In fact, it'll be a combination that'll be fun. It'll be easy to learn. And it won't be very intimidating. And the good thing about glides is they're, for what you'll be doing, it'll be a little bit soft on the launch, primarily because it's a power glide, but that's not a bad thing. You can carry first gear for a long time. But no, you'll enjoy that combination quite a bit, but you will definitely need some converter and gear if you're going to be running a turbo. But it just depends on how fast you want your drag car to be. Mr. A. Joseph checking in and saying, met you at the track Friday. Keep up the work, man. I appreciate it. Got the arm flex. I like it. Yeah, I remember that, man. Hopefully you guys had a good time. I was on Little Miss Revlon's street setup, so getting the car out of the hole was a little bit of a challenge, especially as the night went on. So to give you guys an idea, humidity ended up being 90%. And I mean, when you see the cars and they've got that nice little, you know, gleam of sweat over them, that's when you know probably time to pack it up. But I tried to make one more pass, and that was kind of a dumb idea on those drag radials. But they did pretty well leading up to that. Sam Crable saying that he needs gauges, and KB is asking, B Mason, is your Hellcat stick or is it auto? Automatic. Automatic. Sam's checking in with Doc Dip. So let's talk about turbocharging for a minute. So I don't want to get too far away from the chat. So why did I save turbocharging for last? The reason why I saved turbocharging for last, number one, turbocharging in a just by itself is the cheat code. And what do I mean by that? A turbocharger, if you have a 10-pound spring in your wastegate, a turbocharger will try to make 10 pounds regardless of the altitude, regardless of the density altitude, regardless on what planet you're on. The thing is going to still try to make 10 pounds of boost. And it will make 10 pounds of boost until it literally runs out of air, until the altitude gets to a point where the wastegate never opens. It'll still make those kinds of numbers, which is an advantage over anything that's belt driven. Belt driven stuff takes gulps the same way as a piston does. And to that point, so does a turbocharger, but you're limited in the scope. In other words, if a belt is turning it, then based on the engine RPM and load, it's going to suck in only so much of the atmosphere. And there's no way to get any more boost into the car unless you pulley the thing up. Well, a turbo doesn't have anything like that to worry about. So that's one cheat code that it's got. The second cheat code is the simple fact that it is the most efficient means of filling a cylinder full of boosted air. Now, what exactly does efficiency mean in this? Well, you're not taking a mechanical device, say any of the superchargers, especially, let's take a look at centrifugal versus turbo, because they're basically the same thing in terms of the impeller. At least it is visually. The impeller design is going to be a little bit different, but you get the idea. You look at one snail, you look at the other snail, and it looks basically the same. There is a step-up transmission inside the centrifugal superchargers, typically 4-to-1, in some cases it's 5-to-1. And what that means is for every one revolution of the engine, in terms of revolutions per minute, you're going to step that centrifugal supercharger up 4 or 5 times. So in other words, at 1,000 RPM, your supercharger can be turning 4 or 5,000 RPM. So in other words, at 6,000 RPM or 7,000 RPM, depending on how hard you're really pushing the thing, and this is on a 1-to-1 drive, by the way, you would be looking at 5 times that number, 30,000 odd RPM, and then you factor in your pulley ratio. Could be a 2-to-1 pulley ratio, which at that point you would multiply your RPM times 2. So your 60,000 RPM now is, or 30,000 RPM is now 60,000 RPM. That takes a lot of power to make happen. Now, not as much as it takes to turn the rotors and cram air with a positive displacement supercharger, but it certainly does take a lot. Then you factor in belt slip and things like that. Well, turbos don't have that to worry about. Not to mention, they don't have to worry about being driven off of the crankshaft. Basically, it means that, well, any weird harmonics or anything like that that could be inherent with a specific supercharger don't affect the engine at all. Then you get into the fact that it is, although not 3 horsepower, it is using a more efficient means to spin the impellers. Basically, a turbo is just 2 superchargers faced one against the other. It's a way to think of it, in other words. One impeller basically turning your compressor through a common shaft. The good part about that is that you're taking energy that the engine would have just been dumping off into the atmosphere, and you're putting it to good use to turn that turbocharger. And where a positive displacement supercharger, at least in terms of a Hellcat, so let's talk about it in terms of like 700-ish horsepower. The supercharger takes about 125 horsepower to turn that thing at wide open throttle. Let's just say 100 because it's easier numbers to play with. Let's just say that this supercharger takes 100 horsepower to turn at wide open throttle. Peak power. A centrifugal supercharger may only take 80, and a turbocharger may only consume 40 or 30. So there's still that loss because of, it's not a free-flowing exhaust. You have a built-in restriction, and it's called your turbocharger, and it's there to make boost. The downside to the turbo, and I'll just get to this first and foremost, is packaging. Turbos, depending how they're packaged, can, well, let's just be honest, they can look like ass. I mean, I've seen guys hack these things together and they end up just not really looking the part. Not to mention routing exhaust tubes around, for especially when we're talking about singles. You get into clearance issues, and if you thought you had problems with a centrifugal supercharger, if you're running twin turbos, now you got double the problem in terms of real estate that you got to try to come up with. And there's interesting ways to go about it. You've got guys that'll try to put them in the mid of the car. Other guys that'll do rear mount turbocharging, which includes issues potentially with oiling and all these other easily engineered around challenges, but still challenges nonetheless. And so when we're talking about turbocharging, yes, it's significantly more efficient, and yes, you get this very flat tabletop of torque, which means, again, even more horsepower all over the place, provided that you've sized your turbo correctly. And that's the other thing that can potentially get guys into trouble, is that they'll go straight to the bottom of the page. I want the biggest turbo I can possibly find, which is great, because in some instances it will actually fit your application in terms of making a power number, but it will be a complete turd on the street. It's fantastic when you're banging the thing off of a two-step or foot braking it to the moon, but just driving the thing around, they can be a little bit laggy. So you got to make sure that you size your turbocharger appropriately, because if you don't, the downside is just going to be all in that driving experience. Now, a lot of guys like that. I'm kind of in this camp. I like a little bit of a laggy turbo, because when they come on, number one, if it's sized to be a little bit laggy, that means that your back pressure is not going to be that prevalent. That's the pressure that it's taken to actually spin the turbo. And you don't run into problems like you might with other systems, with knock, low-speed spark knock, things like that. Well, you will once it comes in under load, if it comes in under load too soon. But anyway, I'm not going to get too deep into that. But here's the fun thing about it. When you get the thing spooled up and it just rushes and throws you in the back, it throws your back into that seat, that's when they get to be a lot of fun. And that's when you kind of see and you know where your money's been spent. Turbo cars, caught a midair, body count 2 for the night. Turbo cars are the most dramatic, especially when they're done just right. In other words, take one of the more exciting ones that I had driven back in the day. I had a friend of mine with a Supra, Mark IV Supra, 2JZ setup, the whole routine, 78 millimeter turbo. That was one of the more fun cars for me to drive, because it would just car put down like 750 to the wheels, but it would, when it came on, it was just on. It was just so much fun. So certainly exciting, but that rush from having nothing to something, and then it just carries the torque until you take your foot out of it. It's a lot of fun. Certainly gets your attention. But the packaging part of turbos, especially when you're dealing with something that you're trying to put a significant amount of power into the car, a lot of times are just not really street-friendly setups. I mean, there's some for the Mopars where I forget, it might be the Helion setup, but the turbos are set up underneath the car, basically in the gap where the cats would have gone. But there's no clean path for the intake charge getting to the turbo, so there's just a couple of air filters there. I don't really like air filters underneath my car, and so that's already a drawback number one. But again, if you're thinking about going that route, just know that you are going to have some concessions with the packaging. And then there's the expense of it, and again cooling it, which then again becomes a train wreck, because now not only are you packaging the compressors, but you got to package everything else that's associated with it to cool everything down. It can just be a little bit overwhelming. So until proven wrong, I will say that for me, although I like turbos, and this doesn't have anything to do with trucks and things like that have got a lot more room to work in, mainly talking about the cars here. I think I'll stick to the stuff that's more fun on the street. But again, it's up to you. It depends on, I mean, that's just for me. Depending on what you're up to, there's a lot of different ways you can go about making power. Oh, Anthony's saying, not saying nitrous doesn't work. I know people who have run it. I like the roots blowers and turbos more. Hats off to guys running nitrous though. So let's chat about nitrous. Nitrous. Okay, first of all, you're talking, or you're listening to a guy that put a Sneaky Pete system on a riding lawnmower, and it worked pretty good. I love nitrous. I love it for every reason why I hate it. So here's the thing. I saved nitrous for last, basically because I want to make sure that, first of all, we were talking about boost. And although you could say, well, nitrous is basically the same thing, you're just introducing more oxygen, the same way you're introducing more oxygen with mechanical boost. That's correct, except for the fact that when the bottle runs out, the fun goes away. And that's the biggest drawback to nitrous oxide, is that you got to refill the bottle. With any boosted application, that power is there all the time, no matter what. With the only major bummer about boost is that when the temperature, the ambient temperature goes up, power goes down, potential for knock goes up, and, well, quite honestly, with nitrous, you just carry your atmosphere in a bottle. But really, that's beside the point. Here's some things to consider when you're looking at nitrous. And I'm going to kind of walk this around a little bit, so just let's go for a ride. First thing guys will say is nitrous is the least expensive. Wrong. I'll tell you this right now. The really good setups are significantly more expensive than you may think. A really good nitrous outlet setup, which is run off of injector pulse width, is fully programmable, that has window switches, that's got the ability to run multiple kits. Basically, the setup for nitrous is not necessarily going to be super cheap like you might think. It certainly isn't like what it used to be back in the day, or at least it shouldn't be, where you would just get a plate, a bottle, a button, and on a dry shot, that's all you needed, and you just spray and pray. Nitrous is going to be a little bit different, and the funny thing about nitrous too is if you're running around on the street with your nitrous and you're planning on using your nitrous, then the one big thing that you've done already is you've killed some power with your NA setup. Just the way that it is. When you go wide open, you're going to need either some type of a timing retard box, or in your tune that you're going to have, it's just going to be somewhat or significantly neutered in terms of timing. So you just have to keep that into consideration. You're going to be driving around on a car that's tuned for nitrous. That typically, or that customarily, would mean that you're driving around on a car that's been, well, rendered less potent on the street. But that all goes away once the arming button gets, flicked and the go fast button gets pushed. But that's just one thing to consider coming into the conversation. Now, secondly, there is some maintenance aside from just filling the bottle all the time. Keep in mind that you've got electric solenoids that are controlling fuel, which you should be running a wet kit, but you've got electric solenoids that are be controlling fuel and nitrous going into that engine. If one of those solenoids fails, and they fail more often than you may hope to think that they do, if one of those solenoids fails, one of two things is going to happen. You'll either be introducing a bunch of raw fuel into the engine, which could potentially cause a problem, in the way of hydro locking the engine, or you will have straight nitrous being thrown into the engine, and with no extra fuel available, could potentially run the risk of cooking a piston. Happens to happen more than you think. So just remember, if you're planning on going nitrous, swap out your solenoids at least every other season, and every season if you're not using them very often. Believe me. Oh, and here's some other things. Nitrous oxide is overwhelmingly stable in ambient conditions. You could have a bottle spraying right in front of you, take a lighter and light it, it'd blow the lighter right out. But under heat and compressed states, it's a little bit different story. That's when it becomes this twitchy little molecule that's dying to separate the oxygen from the nitrogen. Well, here's the thing. If you have a solenoid that leaks, and if that solenoid that's leaking is your nitrous solenoid, and you've been dumb enough to leave your nitrous on as opposed to venting it in between runs or what have you, when you go to start your car, you'll get a nasty little thing called a nitrous backfire. Google it. It's a pretty explosive situation, and what it basically is there's nitrous in the intake manifold, and when you go to start the car, the nitrous will fire because it's being compressed and ignited with fuel, and it will backfire through the basically right through the intake tract and explode the intake manifold. In the worst case scenario, you might see it even lift the hood, and all kinds of interesting things take place with that. So there is care, and you got to basically treat, when you've got nitrous in the car, you've got to treat that thing like a loaded gun. It is a bomb ready to go off under the right circumstances, because again, it's extremely safe in ambient conditions. I mean, there's nothing to it. But again, so are bullets, right? You know, so make sure that you care, you practice safe nitrous practices is the best way I can put it. But if you've got all of those bases covered, I guess, then yeah, nitrous is really good, except for one little thing. The problem with nitrous is that it is typically, for most guys that aren't running a progressive controller, even some that are, and you're going to feed this thing in over the course of 2 seconds, most guys don't, but you have shift points. Doesn't really matter, you're not overcoming inertia at that point, but it's at the hit. When you tag that button, you've got this major hard torque hit, and the power curve goes, everything's cool, everything's cool, everything's cool, I have all the torque now. It goes off the charts. Transmissions don't like that too much, neither do chassis. So you have to make sure that, number one, your transmission is not only able to handle the torque hit, but it's kind of like hitting something with a hammer. You know, 10 pounds of force is just 10 pounds sitting on you. That's like a turbo or a centrifugal or even a Roots style supercharger, positive displacement. It's just there. Whereas 10 pounds of striking force is a little bit different, and that's how you end up breaking stuff. That's one of the reasons why, you know, I'll say, yeah, the limit to an HP 70 transmission might be, you know, 550 pound-feet of torque on a Mustang dyno, but if you hit it with nitrous, that could go down to, you know, 5 1/4, 500 even, depending on the shot of dope. So anyway, word to the wise on that. It is the hardest on components, primarily because when you hit it, it hits the hardest. And so what's it like to drive a nitrous car? Well, it depends on the type of a hit that you're going to be going for. But the old school stuff that I used to play with, which was basically run from the Schrader valve to your fuel solenoid, basically run from your bottle that's in the back of your Viper, run these basically the plate systems on both sides on the throttle bodies, window switch, and micro switch. Micro switch just means when you go wide open, it won't fire until you go wide open, but you can still trigger it and be armed. Yeah, hitting one of those with a 300 shot. Yeah, I'm a lot dumber than I sound. Well, at least I was. And this is how I know stuff, because I tried to do as many dumb things as I possibly could, which is fun, but dumb. Kids, don't try this at home. HU37 is saying the choice of power adder influences the mods you put on a car. For example, I have a Centrifugal in mine. I changed the gear in my car to eliminate the slow tip-in response. Absolutely. Especially when you consider the fact that you've now pushed your torque so far out. Let's see. Sam's saying air-to-air is what most turbo diesel trucks run. Let's see. Oh, and heavy equipment may not even have it. Yeah, some heavy equipment won't even have it. In fact, a lot of the diesel generators don't have any intercooling whatsoever. They don't want to have any. Well, I think about it, they'll have an air-to-air, but a lot of the compound systems won't even have any intercooling. But, you know, again, they're running it, 18 to 20 pounds of boost at 900 RPM. And that's an actual number. HU37 saying with no, with this, wait, damn it, messed up. Okay. HU37 saying with the Centrifugal, I have an air-to-air intercooler and use water methanol to supplement the charge cooling. Don't get greedy with your water meth. Go74 saying, is there any major difference between the Biscayne and the Impala? The Biscayne was a lower trim level, if I remember correctly, than the Impala. But in terms of everything else, no real difference whatsoever. Sam's saying, Ghost depends on the year. Cody's saying, so basically tune your car regardless of fuel. Yes. Tune your car for whatever your intended purpose is for it also. Sam's asking, I would not mind a water meth system on a diesel. It will help with EGTs and emissions. I don't have any experience with water meth on a diesel, but I would assume it would be something fairly close. Mr. A. Joseph saying, I was shocked about the Audi R3 showing out with 11s. Yeah, don't ever be shocked about an Audi going fast. I have been shown taillights by plenty of S7s, and a couple of S5s. I mean, there's some stuff out there that is obnoxiously fast. And a lot of them have the 4 rings. I'm telling you, man. So, it is not uncommon. It used to not be anyway. There was a group of guys with S7s, by the way. Low 10-second cars. They're like 137, 139 miles an hour. They just get out there and whoosh down the track. It was nuts seeing how fast those things were. I've only been shocked. I was shocked initially, but now when I see one go fast, it's like, oh, it's just another Audi that goes out there and screams. Just don't let it let go. That's the only thing, because when they do, it is nasty expensive. George Loves Speeds checking in saying, what's up? What's up, George? Check out his shenanigans with that Camaro. Some Ferrari guys checking in with saying, with my packs and setup used mainly for Roll Mexico racing, how worried should I be about MT82 holding up? Don't worry about it too much. I just wouldn't do any power downshifts like a 4.3 wide open hit. You're probably running on drag radials, so you'll probably be okay, but I'm not going to tell you it's going to last forever. They do tend to do okay though, but just be on the lookout. I would probably say that you're going to be needing something replaced on it, possibly shift forks. You know, it's funny too. Shift forks were one of the big issues with MT82 cars, and I don't know if anybody's making a set of billet shift forks. That would be something that would work fairly well with that car and would keep some of them from grenading. Let's see. Greg's checking in saying, hope you can give me some input. He's got a 2010 Challenger RT with long tubes, 114,000 on the clock. He's got a shop nearby that offers a Kenny Bell setup Am I asking for trouble with these miles? Casual use driving? No, I wouldn't worry about that. The only thing I would say is, to the Kenny Bell setup, it's gonna, cooling is gonna be at a premium, but you're just out playing around with the thing. You don't have anything to worry about. I would say you should be fine. One thing I would caution you on though is valve seats on those heads. Before you throw the blower on the thing, I would have new valve seats installed in the heads, and that can get pricey. So it's up to you if you want to look into that. The reason for that is the earlier Hemis did have issues with valve seats. So, just be on the lookout for that. Basically, anything after 2013, 2014, you'd be in pretty good shape. But anything before that, possible issues. Check on your year. Your year may not be as affected by that, but I don't want to see you throw the blower on there, spend all that money, and then drop a valve seat and lunch a motor. So check into that. George is saying, I say you spray some nitrous to pack the cylinder with oxygen. That's certainly one way to do it. Don't think I haven't tried. And by the way, there's a certain little Hellcat running around with a stock blower that's in the 8s right now. Spraying a little bit of the giggle gas in there. But yeah, no, I put nitrous on anything when I was a kid, man. let me think about this. Riding lawnmower is probably the funniest. By the way, it did work. There was a patch of grass that would grow a lot out of gray water system, and over that gray water system, the grass would grow like crazy, so my lawnmower would start to bog a little bit, and freaking hit it with that 25 shot old Sneaky Pete system. Motor right through it. It'd make a little bit of weird noise and smoke a little bit, but it would certainly get through it. Don't necessarily recommend that. Let's see, we did that. We put it on a John boat. I had a Johnson 9.9 outboard motor on a 14-foot John boat. Put the same nitrous system on that thing. Ran pretty good until the motor blew up. Actually, didn't really blow up. Just scored the hell out of the cylinder heads. But that's what two-strokes do when you're dumb like me. Let's see. X is asking, best go-tos for weight reduction on an S197 Mustang. Wheels, tires, for sure. Drag pack is what you're going to be looking at. You can always do the normal stuff. Pull the seats. Rear seat delete is another good way to do it. Pull the carpet, pull the juke. Depends on how much weight reduction you really want to get into. Lightweight hoods, trunk lids, things like that are also an option. Pulling in your fender wells, although it makes a mess out of everything. You're really kind of getting into the nitpicking at that point. But that being said, the choice is yours. Because of course, drag everything out of the trunk that you can. Pretty much, if it needs to be bolted down, it probably doesn't need to be in the car. So clean out your glove box, make sure your console is clean. You would be surprised how much weight can be hiding in those things. Little stuff like that can make a difference. Don't get nutty though with it. Don't start taking the door cards off and ripping speakers out of the doors. That's just dumb. But the rest of it certainly is on the books for fair play. You can also get lightweight seats, things like that. AQ37 say the problem with the turbo is mainly packaging with all the plumbing. Smaller displacement engines are smaller in size. Turbos allow small displacement engines to make big power. That's very true, provided that they've got the packaging or the platform that'll allow that packaging. Cody's saying, good thing I'm not rushing to turbo. My Corolla Goal NA is around 200 horsepower and the turbo is around 300 to 350. George is saying, yeah, that does suck. Yeah. Talking about a little squeeze. Sam saying, what do you say a truck can't be fun on the street? I'm planning 700 to 800 wheel horsepower truck. Man, a lot of those down here. A whole lot of 800 horsepower diesels down here. George is saying, very wrong. It can cost the same as a blower. Talking about the cost, just the sheer cost of the nitrous setups, and that's kind of what I was getting at, man. That's the worst misconception about nitrous is that they're cheap. In fact, if you go cheap on a nitrous system, especially on a modern car, then you have just bought yourself a blown up engine. I mean, I'm just going to tell you that straight out. And for those guys that would argue the point saying, I've run my whatever can trap a lapshin on my Giz Wiz forever and it hadn't blown up yet. Yet is the operative word. To do it right, you've got to have the right controllers. To do it effectively for a long period of time, you've got to be able to control that as much as you're going to be controlling the timing map, the fueling map, basically everything about your ECU that you can control. You need to have that same control over what is in essence a separate fueling and oxygen delivering system, which is that nitrous kit. So absolutely. Looks like I'm running a little bit behind. Let's see. Hey, White Knuckle, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Saying, what up, B? Was reading the ZF can pull timing if it senses trouble. Is this true? And what would be the power or torque number for this to happen? Well, yeah, it kind of can. So here's the thing. That's going to be part of the torque management protocol. You've got several different torque management protocols that can be referenced. You've got ECU torque management, and you have TCM control management. They're both married, but still kind of separate. But yes, if the transmission senses an excessive amount of slip, it can pull timing. And it'll also chop throttle, by the way. At what torque number? That is going to be referenced from engine RPM and input or output shaft RPM. If there's too much of a discrepancy, then it's going to start to chop power. It does pull timing on the shift naturally through the torque management protocol. I don't like pulling a lot of torque management out of the transmission. Initially, a lot of guys were just yanking all the torque management out, and that was all fine and good. The problem is that when the cars started making more power, or if you had a transmission that was a little bit weaker from the factory, anyway, you can start to see some issues with wear on those. And the reason why is, and the other thing is that the torque management will actually allow the transmission to shift a little bit quicker. You're just pulling power and you're allowing things to take place extremely quickly inside the transmission, but when you just kind of pull power like this, like that, like you don't even see it, then it can allow the transmission to actually shift a little bit more quickly and a little bit more precisely, and you'll have the right amount of slip in between as the gear shift is taking place. I've done this test, and I've done with my SRT 392, I did full everything, all torque management, all the way down to no torque management. Strangely enough, no torque management was the quickest, but by like a couple of thousandths or something like that, something hardly memorable. But the main takeaway here with that, though, is the DA was also slightly lower. But the most consistent was with just the transmission torque management in play, which just means that it's still pulling timing. But yes, there are some instances where the ZF can. There's not a specific torque number, although if you start ramping it up to 550-ish pound-feet of torque to the rear wheels on a HP 70, hey buddy, then you may start to see it. You may start to see those types of issues, and that'll be an expected torque. Dr. Diff will have to remind me on this. It's been a little bit since I've run into this, but it'll be an expected torque issue will cause that. In other words, actual torque versus expected torque might be an issue. It may read that wrongly if there's excessive amounts of slip in there. But thank you very much for the contribution, brother. I appreciate that. HU37 saying the problem with nitrous is that it's hard to resist the temptation to keep adding more of it. A 125 becomes 150, that becomes 200, and finally connecting right through the block. It has happened before. And George is saying definitely need the progressive for higher than 125 shot. I absolutely agree with that. Callus is asking, how would you feel about putting twin turbos on a 5.7? Twin turbos on a 5.7 really isn't a big deal necessarily. It just wouldn't be my cup of tea, primarily because that would be a fairly significant endeavor. You would be making quite a bit of power, but again, the packaging of twin turbos in the LX platform, the packaging in the LX platform for twin turbos is just a little bit clumsy in my opinion. I just haven't seen a kit that I would want to run long term on any of the cars that I've seen anyway. I would probably go E-Force on a 5.7 anyway and call it good, just because that combination has been so much fun, at least again in my experience. Let's see, Sam's saying, I wonder how fast a Charger RT Pursuit all-wheel drive with a cam and blower would be. It'd be all right. Be pretty quick. They're heavy though. Let's see. Cody's asking, 100,000 on a 5.7 is basically just starting to break it in. That's kind of true. GS1 saying, thanks for getting into the discussion on Nitrous. So the thing with Nitrous, here's the thing. Just remember that it's up to you as the person that owns the car. It's up to you to have the restraint to not just throw all of the nitruses at it. Have a goal in mind. Know that your goal can be met with the spray, but just also know that in the process of playing, you're going to want to not err on the side of going cheap. And you know, that's if there is a singular mistake that a lot of guys make when it comes to nitrous, it is the mistake of thinking, well, I can just get all of this power and it's really not going to cost me anything. It could cost you your motor, okay? So just know that coming into it, especially with these modern cars that are already making a ton of power. Cody's saying, best way to reduce weight is what B said on the 392 What Works video, take off the wheels and tires. You don't need them. Well, yeah, you don't need the wheels, tires. That's just extra weight. I mean, brakes. I mean, I'm here to go fast, not stop fast. Hood. I mean, that's just getting away of, you know, air getting in my motor. I got, you know, a trunk lid. Don't need a trunk lid. Doors. Doors are dumb. And that's the thing. And by the way, you think I'm saying all that for effect. It's only somewhat sarcastic. Y'all should have seen Legion of Demons last year. If you think that they are not above stripping a car in the middle of the freaking pits to try to save some weight, then you just haven't met these folks yet. I could not believe the lengths that these guys would go to try to shave weight. And when you walk up to a Demon, I mean a bona fide legit Demon, and it's the same color on the inside as it is on the outside, because the inside has no trim, no carpet, no headliner, no nothing. So you're seeing the inside panels. There are no inside panels. It's the other side of the body. You know, I'm half surprised they didn't use an old freaking 5-gallon bucket as a seat. They would have, I guarantee. There's a couple of them that would have done it if they'd gotten away with it. What a mess. But anyway, such is life on that side of the tracks, right? So I decided I was just going to sit there and just talk shit the whole time to them. So anyway, I had a ball. I had fun. I entertained myself. See, Daniel's asking, how about having more than 300,000 miles on an 06 Dodge Ram 3/4 ton with a 5.7? I mean, that sounds about right. Our fleet trucks are all 2017 Dodge trucks. We've got some of them with 240, 250,000 miles on them right now. Mine only has 101,000 miles on it now. But yeah, no, they keep trucking. They keep running. Daniel saying, with the original exhaust manifold? Yep. All of those have the original. By the way, what is up with me and the Hemi Tick? Do I just talk about it so much that it just shows up? Anyway, of the fleet trucks, and I want to say that we've got, let me think about this for a minute. 23? I think we have 23 2017 tradesmen's on the books right now. Of those, I think I am one of 5 that has had the Hemi tick. And that might have been four or 5 that have had the Hemi tick. Everybody else is doing great, and everybody else beats the crap out of their trucks, and they haven't had any issues. So, but yeah, they are out there, Daniel. I promise you. They're just hard to come by. White Knuckles saying, "Beautiful chocolate lab beef. Thank you very much." Yeah, he's not a happy camper right now. With all this rain and whatever. Anyway, we had I don't know, Southeast Texas apparently had a flea infestation because getting flea meds over the counter is practically impossible. I had to go to 3 different places to get him his meds. But we've been taking a lot of baths, haven't we, buddy? Yep, lots of baths, lots of brushing, lots of vacuuming, lots of shampooing of carpet, trying to get him squared away. So he'll be back to being his normal goofy hell-raising self here before too long. We were playing earlier, so he's feeling better, but yeah, he's hating life right now. Cody saying, "Blue stop blow out." Cody saying Cletus McFarland saved weight on his Corvette by literally stripping it down to the chassis and roll cage and built it from there. Yeah, and it's still a Corvette, right? Trust me. Pull up to the club in that thing and get a girl to go for a ride with you by saying you got a Corvette sitting outside. Anyway, White Knuckles saying, "Yeah, nitrous on the 5.7 is okay as long as it's in moderation. I've been running 100 shot on mine for the last 2 years. No issues at all other than a drive shaft." Yep, that's what nitrous does best, is break transmission parts, including U-joints and drive shafts. Let's see, GS1's asking, what do you think? Full set of wheels and tires, or keep the stock 245s and get a race star type setup for track days? Just get the race stars for track days. Don't spend the money on a full set. The reason why I say that is, look, I've got a full set because I'm kind of going after a number typically, or I'm optimizing the setup that I've got. If you're not doing that, you're just going out and having fun. You want the tires for safety at the drag strip, do it for those reasons. But the difference in ET is not quite as great as you might think. You're looking at maybe half a tenth for the front. You're not looking at a tenth. I'll tell you that right now. Not at this power to weight ratio. It's just not going to be there. So I wouldn't worry about that. Just stick with the rears, get out there and have a ball. Justice checking in saying E-Force or Procharger on a stock 5.7 for daily driven and strip on the weekends. Go with the E-Force. GS1's asking, or cheapo bravados for the rear. Love me some bravados, dude. Listen, if I didn't have the setup that I have, I'd be running bravados. I like those wheels a lot. Oh, speaking of wheels, so my Demon replicas, I think, come in on Thursday? Maybe on Thursday. So I might take half a day off, run the thing down, and just have them mounted and get back to the house. But looking forward to that because I am sick of cleaning slingshots. That's all there is to it. Hate it. Don't want it no more. So I'm going to go with the Demons, and I just like the way that they look better too. I think that just kind of the more butch look of the Challenger, you're going to need to have something that's going to go along with that. And I think the slingshots are just a little bit too delicate. It's just not modern enough to get that kind of a wheel. I think they look great on the Chargers, just not my cup of tea on the Challengers. What's up, buddy? What's wrong? Poor guy. I feel so bad for him. HU37 saying, as far as I know, the problem with the Hemi tick has to do with cars that spend a lot of time at idle, such as police cars. That is not necessarily correct. So the Hemi tick depends on which Hemi tick we're talking about. But if we're talking about the manifolds, that's just a Hemi thing. That's just the Hemi tick exhaust leak. Now, The Hemi tick as it pertains to the lifters is a little bit different story, and that for the older vehicles and for some of the newer ones could potentially be traced back to the amount of time that they spent idling. A lot of those problems were, a lot of those issues were eliminated with the redesign of the lifter itself, but truth be told, there were still some that were having problems. But that's really where those issues were coming up. It was just the general design of the lifter, or so they've said. My first truck did have a lifter fail, and it was interesting because it developed the Hemi tick at nearly the same time that it developed the bad lifter. And so for you guys that haven't, or that won't ever run into this, this is how it breaks down. If you have a tick right when you start the car, or typically it's a truck that's going to be doing this, you fire it up and it ticks for just a few seconds and then that goes away. That is an exhaust manifold leak, and what it is like on mine, it was number 8. Both of the bolts on number 8 had broken. What happens is that it ticks because there's exhaust gas getting past the manifold, and it'll tick, 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 tick. But once everything gets hot and it swells up, it'll kind of seal itself shut. The other Hemi tick, which is the lifter, which is the one you don't want to hear, it's a little bit different. It'll initially sound like a normal Hemi tick, but there's of course a twist here. When you give the vehicle, and it'll keep going at idle for longer. It may not keep going for a substantial amount of time, depends on how far into this problem that you are, but it'll typically go for a little bit longer, somewhere around, I don't know, 10 to 12 seconds, or it'll seem like it just doesn't go away. If you tap the throttle, just give it a little bit of throttle, just enough to get the oil pressure up a little bit. If you do that and the problem goes away and then comes back when the vehicle returns back to idle, that is typically the telltale sign of a bad lifter. There's another sound that's kind of associated with it as well. It will be kind of like a chirp almost. It's a tick for sure, but it's not a tick, 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 tick. It's not a real quick tinny sounding tick. It almost has a little bit of depth to it. It's extremely hard to explain, but the minute you hear it, you'll know what it is, and it really does have kind of a chirp to it. So, but that's the kind of the telltale sign of that lifter going bad, and it's kind of grinding across the lobe. And again, if you've heard it, you'll immediately pick up on it. You'll automatically know what it is. And GS1 is saying thanks. Absolutely. So getting back to the whole boost and nitrous and everything else thing, if you're thinking about going that route, here's the main thing to consider is have a goal first. Know what you're really getting into, but find out, get in with your locals, talk to guys, go to the local drag strip if you can, go to some of the cruise nights, find somebody with a setup similar to what we're talking about here. Find if you've got a 5.7, find somebody with an E-Force to chat with in person. You can talk to people on forums and all that, but in person is always a whole lot better. Talk to somebody in person and get their opinions of it. Talk to somebody with a Pro Charger, get their opinions of it. Turbos are going to be very few and far between, but Nitrous will be out there too. Talk to these guys, find out what they're running, find out what they've had success with, and develop your own opinion. I mean, I can try to steer you in the right direction, but what might be right for me may not be right for you. And it might be that, in fact, what I would consider to be what I would do, you might go, oh, I don't like that at all. That sucks. So develop that opinion of your own and try to get a ride in one of the things. That was the final thing I was going to bring up. If you're thinking about an E-Force, try to get at least a ride in one of them. And I think you'll find pretty quickly that, yes, I like that. I like the way that it rides. Or now I don't really feel much of a difference if we're talking about a ProCharge car, because, that's one of the things. I don't really know if I touched on it too much, but for these Hemis, damn it, that's one of the things that did get on my nerves a little bit about the centrifugal supercharged 5.7s and 6.4s. I'll just be honest with you guys. I liked the E-Force, even the old compressor. I liked the E-Force on the 5.7s. But when it came to the ProChargers, because the boost level was typically kind of low, the drawback to them is that you never really felt them make any real power. And that's mainly, again, because of the boost level. You're not giving the thing enough of a chance, really. But I guess when it comes down to it, a lot of guys were, and again, these are cars that are picking up 130, 150 horsepower to the rear wheels on a Mustang dyno. You're going, God, you're going to feel that, right? Don't be so quick to assume that. Yeah, you'll kind of feel it, but the problem is that about the time you start to, something's going, you got to shift. Damn it, what the hell? So there's like these little spiders that are in my garage sometimes too. It's about that time of year these things start coming out. Anyway, I probably just inhaled a couple of them. Whatever. So I start shooting webs or crawling around walls. But the thing is that you never really got the sense that it had picked up that much power, because the only place that you would see that peak power gain was at peak power. Everything else, you got this, from your point of view, this sliding, amount of gain. So it's like a little bit. You're basically getting micro-dosed with horsepower up to the very top, the crescendo of this thing, but now you got to shift. Whereas, on the other hand, positive displacement supercharger, you're getting full dose boost all the time. So that would be the only complaint. I mean, if I've got something to really gripe about when it comes to boost, is the expectation that you may have when you're putting that ProCharger on your car. But make no mistake, you get the thing out on the highway and you start letting it go through the gears, that's certainly going to be a different story. I mean, you're just feeling the thing, it's pushing you back, you're going, man, this is great, this is awesome. But it's the getting it up to that point. And for a lot of guys, that's actually probably a really good thing, because it's easier to launch, they're easier on driveline components, easier on tires, all of that. But again, yeah, it's got a supercharger on it, but just make sure that your expectations are where they need to be, which kind of brings us back full circle. What should you expect? What type of gains can you expect with these things? Well, with a positive displacement supercharger, realistic number, look for somewhere around 130 horsepower at the most to the rear wheels. These are all low boost figures. You can always dial the things up to whatever number you can try to get away with. But the reality is that what's streetable, what can you get away with 91 octane, much more clearly with 93, but 93 is this kind of a tried and true number, but a lot of folks have 91 that they're working with. So you have to work within the parameters and the limitations of the fuel that you have on tap. So getting into that, you've got to make sure that you're working within those specific parameters. That's the big issue, though, because those parameters are going to dictate the amount of timing that you can run. You can run a lot of boost with no timing and make no power and have a car that runs like a dog. So there's that to consider when you're talking about which supercharging option is best for you. If we're talking about something readily available over the counter that is simply easy to tune and easy to work with, can't beat a positive displacement supercharger, because let's face it, it's the easiest or one of the easiest to install. Hey, buddy, I know. That stuff will start kicking in a couple of days, I promise. Poor guy. But if you're more into doing street pulls and things like that, then that positive displacement supercharger really isn't going to do you a whole lot of good in that environment. But again, the ProCharger isn't really going to do you a whole lot of good leading up to that big number anyway. So again, you have to be honest with yourself. How are you going to drive the car? What is the real intended purpose of this thing? Is it a daily? Then get something that's just going to be fun to drive and don't worry about outright numbers. Is it a situation, are you in a situation where you're going to, and you know you're going to be doing a lot of highway pulls? Then get something that's going to be good at doing highway pulls. Cody's saying, I'm mistaking that chirp for a belt. Yeah, check that in. Saltec saying, g'day mates. Howdy from Texas. Well, Mopars is in. Everybody say, what's up, Mopar? D's checking in. Let's see. HU's saying, when it comes to a power out, I think it should fit the personality of the car. With a Hemi, definitely a positive displacement. Mustangs tend to pull more on the big end. Yeah, they do. And they're a lot of fun when they do it. Mustang Lab saying, what was it like when Paul Walker picked you up after you parked the RX-7? It was intense. It's funny. But yeah, one of the most, you know, if I were to, you know, rank questions, you know, that I'll get, you know, guys will touch me up, or you know, what are some of the more common questions that I get? A lot of it has to do with nitrous and boost and supercharging and things like that. A close second to that would be camshafts, but it's interesting because the response from me is very similar. You know, which camshaft should I run? Which boost should I run? It's all relative. There's no right answer to that, unfortunately. It's easy to say that, you know, one camshaft or one supercharging method is better than another, but the reality is they're not. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to talk about too. Make sure, and this is kind of a big deal for some of you guys, so verify that whatever kit that you're looking at is legal to install on the street in your area. It won't do you a whole lot of good to get some awesome kit installed on your car only to find out that you can't get it inspected. Really don't run into that too much down here in Texas. You're just not going to. I mean, it's just, you know, we just don't. You're not going to see that. But in some areas, you might. Well, I'll take that back. In some areas of Texas, you might also see some issues. But for the most part, you typically won't. But in some areas you do. So again, making sure that you have something that's CARB certified, that has all the right stickers and all the right, you know, all the right whatevers you need for that particular type of kit to be made legal in your area is going to be very important. Cody's asking, what are your thoughts on the 5.7 Cherokee? It's not as fast as the 392 and the Trackhawk, but it could be a sleeper SUV. So we had a couple of the, well, not Cherokees, but they were Durangos, 5.7 Durangos, run through the shop. And oddly enough, they ran really good. Now, they're fine. I mean, I like them. I mean, look, they make plenty of power. They do a lot of, they're comfortable. They're just nice trucks. I mean, you know, either Cherokee or Durango, they're both going to be really nice. But not a lot of 5.7 Cherokees, but obviously a ton of the SRT stuff. I mean, I've done so many Trackhawks at this point that it's, you know, it's Trackhawk, you know, just another one, which is weird. But to be honest, you know, the 5.7 stuff is actually pretty cool. I like the 5.7 stuff a lot too. Callis is saying, so the E-Force is good with the 5.7. How about the 6.4? It does well with the 6.4 too. I would say that the 6.4, the only downside to that kit on a 6.4 is that the second you light that thing off, you are more than, put it like this, you are going to start exceeding the limitations of what an HP70 is capable of dealing with. On a sticky tire, obviously that could be more of an issue. On a stock tire, or even if you're just running around on a set of drag radials on the street, you won't really overtax that system too much. However, you got to think of a couple of things there though. One, you're starting out, 392's got an 11-to-1 engine. That's the compression ratio. It's a fairly high compression ratio. The other thing that you have to consider, and it's a legitimate consideration, is fuel quality when you're dealing with that compression ratio. So there's that, but the E-Force does just fine on the 6.4s. I use it in reference to the 5.7s more though, primarily because that you would just see more of the 5.7 guys gravitating towards that kit. And for good reason. They run exceedingly well with that setup. So, waiting for his meds to kick in. This is going to drive me nuts. It's driving him nuts. But yeah, no kidding. There's like this flea infestation down here, and we can't. I mean, I bought a Petco out of the meds. Like, nope, my boy's going to get all he needs if he needs it. So, but yeah, I went to 3 different places. They didn't have it, and then at the third Petco, that's basically I was just kind of going on autopilot. Just went out and said, look, I don't, whichever one I got to go to get it, I need to find it. So they called 3 other stores. So technically, I would have gone to 6 stores, but it was the 6th one, the last one, that we finally found it. Hang on, let me let him out real quick. Go outside, buddy. Come on. All right. Okay. Well, he lied. What's that, baby boy? So anyway, hopefully that, hey buddy, hopefully that answered some questions for you guys. You know, it's always tough when you're trying to make that decision, because when we're talking about making that type of a decision, it's not a small investment to make in your vehicle, whether it's a truck, a car, an SUV, whatever it is. You want to get that extra power. You're wanting that driving experience. You're wanting to have something that's going to be fun. It's, you know, going to make your daily commute more of a riot, whatever it is. You want that, but the cost of it is going to be the limiting factor. So because of the cost, you need to get the most bang for your buck. So again, to bring this thing all the way back around full circle, what's the best bang for the buck? What boost system are you going to get the most out of the vehicle? And if you're talking about, you know, daily driving type scenarios, I mean, I'd say it, but it's going to be positive displacement. That's the reason why so many original equipment manufacturers go with positive displacement. Even though it's the least efficient, it really is the most fun. And if you were to do a focus group on this topic, you would find that if you were to take, you know, 10 people, 100 people, and have them drive, you know, positive displacement turbo, I wouldn't even consider centrifugal supercharger in this aspect, which kind of tells you where it falls in line with me. And the market would dictate that too. I mean, name me one car that had a centrifugal supercharger from the factory that wasn't like a Shelby or a Studebaker, something in the modern era. You're just not going to find hardly any of them. I'll answer the question for you. The MR2 is the only one that comes to mind that came from the factory with a centrifugal supercharger. The rest are all turbos and positive displacement. So, you know, if you look at it from that point of view, I mean, the market will say, you want something brutish and torquey, you get something that makes horsepower, torque right now all the time, and just go with it there. That's really where the smart money's going to go if you're looking to go that route. If you want to go really fast, you're going to have to take a look at either a centrifugal or a turbo setup and just make up your mind whether or not you want to spend the money on fabrication on the turbos, because I mean, we all know eBay turbos make the most power on the planet, right? So you can always go that route. But again, now you're looking at packaging, potential oiling issues, heat, things like that, due to packaging constraints. All of those issues are going to be very prevalent once you start going that turbo route. And of course, even though it's less of a packaging issue, that centrifugal supercharger can still throw a few curveballs your way. Just stuff to be mindful about. But in terms of the overall feel and driving experience, that positive displacement's probably going to get you smiling the fastest. Plus, there's some theater behind it. They just kind of sound cool. GS1's asking, what is the remedy for the transmission issues upon adding boost? Well, it depends. If you're running stock tires, the remedy is just buy more stock tires. If you're running real sticky tires and you're running this thing at the drag strip, transmission rebuild may be in your future. You could possibly do an HP90 here we go. You could run with an HP90 conversion. The only downside to that is obviously once you start building up transmissions, the cost starts getting a little bit nutty. Oh, Catalyst 99, thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's asking, if you bought a 1320, would you keep it in A? Yes, I would. So for those of you guys that don't know, Ray just picked up his 1320. Just came in from Arizona, and it is a beautiful frostbite blue 1320. And we had gone to I was meeting him up at the drag strip. We're going to get some preliminary data on the car and basically get him some seat time in the thing. Well, the track was closed. So he and I basically flew out to Mexico. Listen, we were making hits on this car because the track closed. We found some secluded places in parts unknown. And we're able to make hits on this thing for about 2 hours. Basically burned through a tank of gas in that car. Had more fun, had two grown-ass men acting like a pair of just idiot juvenile delinquents in this thing. I would not want to do anything else to that car that would take away from that type of a driving experience. Not a sure thing to dead hook on the street. Not necessarily. It's irrelevant how fast the car was, or at least was that night, because it had everything going for it. It had the fun factor of being able to more or less just roll into the throttle, basically load the chassis, and as the chassis is loading, just flash it to watt. But it had that fun factor. It had the sound, it had the noise, it had the challenge of getting the thing to hook and turn a decent number on the street. It had all of that going for it, as well as it had just the kind of cool factor of not being overly fast, just being very usable, and basically being able to use every horsepower that car was putting out. But still, you needed skill to get the thing to launch. We're running it at as delivered, so it was as delivered air pressure the whole bit. So, in saying all that, no, I wouldn't do anything to it. I honestly would leave it alone, maybe have a little bit of weight reduction if you're looking to cover a number, but the reality is that thing is going to be a lot of fun, and if you ever decide on a 1320, guys, don't let the internet ruin or jade what you think is fast or fun, because, guys, I'm telling you, a bone stock 1320 on the street will make you a heck of a good driver in terms of a platform to learn how to launch with, but that's beside the point. It is a hell of a lot of fun, and it falls into that fun category. You know, that category of, 11.0 to 12.0, or 12.0 to 13.0. Yeah, there's different guys will say different things, but there's a certain range where that car really does come into its own, or any car comes into their own as far as being fun slightly challenging, but just powerful enough to where it's easy to do dumb stuff with it. Hanging the thing sideways, drifting it through roundabouts, things like that. And it's kind of in that range. So yeah, we were doing a lot of interesting and questionable things with that car, but having a ball doing it. Let's see. Oh, Justin's asking, twin screw or any supercharger and a high stall torque converter too much for the HP70? Not necessarily. I would not go with a high stall torque converter with a twin screw, mainly because you've got all the torque down low. You shouldn't really need it. Most guys will go a little bit calmer with a camshaft on that anyway. Basically what I'm saying is leaving it stock. So you get a lot of the drivability and a very snappy throttle response with that. So you don't want a high stall converter with that. You can go with a little bit higher torque converter. Typically, it's about 3,200 RPM is what you would find, and that would put you in a pretty decent place with a centrifugal supercharger. But again, I don't think that you want to get too crazy with these cars. You got to remember that they're heavy. If we're talking about these cars, you've got to remember that there's a significant amount of inertia that they're going to have to overcome. Take that out of the equation, and obviously you can get away with more. It's just one of the penalties that we have to pay for, it's not only the Mopar tax with the expense, but it's the Mopar tax when it comes to weight too. Let's see. Mustang Lab asking, would you agree that cheap mods like heads, carb, converter, and nitrous, you can't sleep on a Fox body even in a modern car? Well, first and foremost, some of those aren't really cheap mods. I mean, they're inexpensive, I guess, by comparison, but I mean, you would have to do those mods to even come close. And so, but yeah, I mean, heads, if you've got a, obviously if you're carbureted the converter, nitrous, I mean, you'd be, running not only a converter, but you'd be doing a different AOD swap, or rather AOD upgrades, if that were the case. But yeah, no, you wouldn't want to mess with a Fox body that's got some significant mods, primarily because regardless of the power that one of these things makes, you don't need a lot of power to motivate something that simply doesn't weigh anything. You've got Fox body Mustangs that are making 270 horsepower to the rear wheels going mid-12s. So, how would you like to answer for that? And of course, you get anywhere near that 400, 450 horsepower to the rear wheels, I mean, that's deep into the tens. So it's just it's just a simple, factor of power to weight at that point. So, but yeah, don't ever sleep on a Fox body because it didn't take much to make them nasty. I mean, look at how many guys have put 4.8s and 5.3s in Fox bodies, gone out and just, acted a fool. I mean, that's just because that's power to weight for you in a nutshell. James is saying he's got a 2016 Mustang GT Auto. He says he's done some exhaust and a GT350 throttle body and intake. Good setup. What would you do next in terms of modifications? Are these cars able to withstand boost? Yeah, they are. But they're not without their potential drawbacks. I mean, it depends on what type of supercharging setup you want to go with. You may want to look at a rebuild on the trans, but oil pump gears is going to be your limiting factor in terms of RPM. Let's see. You say you've done some exhaust at a GT350 throttle body. They love long tube headers, by the way. And they love them because unlike cam and block, or at least the Mopar stuff, you're able to adjust both intake and exhaust lobes with that dual overhead cam setup. So again, you're able to have a cam profile that can take advantage of scavenging. So I say go for that. So yeah, long tubes, I would say look at half shafts if you plan on taking the thing to the drag strip. Shifter, obviously. Oh wait, no, you're automatic, so you don't have to worry about that. But It just depends really on what you're going to be up to with this thing. If you're just out playing around with it on the street primarily, you'll be in good shape. But if you really want to step it up and start making some serious power, then you're going to have to start looking at rebuild on the transmission. Obviously, again, oil pump gears and the like. Keeps things safe for you. I like it, guys. Well, thank y'all all very much. We are coming up on 2 hours. I'm going to have to check out. But thank y'all very much for hanging out with me this evening. Really do appreciate it. Hopefully I was able to help some of you guys out. And with that, I'm going to let y'all go. Listen, y'all keep wearing your mask. If you're not doing it for yourself, doing it for others. Stay safe out there, guys. And we will catch y'all on the next one. And that is a wrap. God bless. Adios.